Joanne and Deborah and Mary Ann and Ricky McKinnon and Roy Neal Cox. Eric Pravat's in there.
Oh, no.
Did they get Eric?
Yeah, Eric Pravat's in there. Renee out advertising and Larry Blue and Donna Pikes and Bob Horn.
Hey, do you see hand grenades?
No, but they're on the doors, if anybody goes to the door. They just want to talk to the governor. And they won't stop with nothing else.
On February 1st, 1988, in a poor rural county in eastern North Carolina, two Native Americans, Eddie Hatcher and Timothy Jacobs, seized the offices of the Robisonian newspaper, taking 19 hostages and claiming rampant corruption and gross injustice on the part of local authorities. This is a story of hometown terror and charges of terrorism. Robison was a powder keg of poverty, drugs, racism, and violence, and Eddie Hatcher, in undertaking to bring attention to Robison, lit a match, blowing the county wide open. Who is Eddie Hatcher? And was his takeover an act of terrorism or a desperate attempt to bring justice to Robinson County?
Well, on my mother's side, her father was a half-blood. His daddy was white, but his mother was Indian. And my mother's mother, she was full-blooded. There was a lot of intermarriage between Hatchers and Jacobs all the way back. Like both of my grandparents, my granddaddy's mother was a Jacobs, he was a Hatcher. Her mother was a Hatcher. And then all the way back down the line, it was just Hatcher and Jacobs all the way down. I don't know, I don't think they were close kin. They may have been, that may be why we're all crazy as hell. I took my mother's maiden name.
Okay, now, but your father's?
Yeah, he was white, he was a Clark. They lived over towards South Carolina on the other side of Rockingham, down towards Cheraw, South Carolina.
And why did you end up taking your mother's name?
Well, that's just what I took.
I mean, from birth?
My mama's grandparents, my mama's parents practically raised me. So that was, I guess it seemed the right thing to do. We were raised the same way the generation before us was raised. I mean, like when it comes to storm, we had to sit and be quiet. We couldn't talk, couldn't move. You had to sit in reverence to the storm until it was over. We raised most of our own food. We used to go into town when like butter beans or peas. We would shell a lot of bushels of them in the evening, then we'd come here into town and go to the big houses over on the other side, and we'd go door to door and sell them for $1 a quart. That's where we made a little extra money. And those white people bought them up quick. Already shelled.
Tell me a little more about your father.
He worked in cotton mills. He was a weaver. That's it. I mean, that's all there is to tell.
What was your grandmother like?
Well, considering what she went through, she done pretty good. She went for 12 when they got married. She was from right here on the South Carolina line, a little place called Hairtown. It was a very rough place, shooting all the time. In fact, when she was only 11, this man that lives right here, his brother, killed a steam man over my grandmother. When she was only 11 years old, they had a shootout in the street in the dirt road in front of her house. I said, well, Ma, what'd you do when the bullet started? She said, I jumped out the back window and started running over to old man Dr. Harris' place. That old medicine man down there that they called Doc Harris. He wasn't a licensed doctor, but he was a doctor. But anyway, my granddaddy met her at what they used to have called bush harbors, where they take like big heavy straw and make a shelter, and that's where they'd have religious meetings. And that's where they met at one Friday night at a bush harbor right down on the South Carolina line. It's only about 4 miles. And he was 12 and she was 12 and he was 20. And they got married. She had her first child when she was 13. And that's all she done the rest of her life was have young'uns. I mean, she had it rough. And And so I think, you know, a lot of people thought she was a hateful woman. Hell, I'd have been hateful too if I'd lived a life like that, you know. I said, Ma, where'd Pa take you when you got married? She said, to the cotton field in Robeson County. That was her honeymoon. As a boy, I was a good young'un. I was. I always done things for old people, you know, cutting up wood for them, stuff like that. Like I said, we didn't get to go anywhere. I was about, you know, we didn't go to movies and stuff like that. And so I looked after the old people around the house. And I ain't never been a liar. Mama said that I was the only stupid young'un she had, because if she asked me did I do something, I'd say yeah, knowing she's gonna beat the hell out of me. But the other two, you know, they'd just lie, swear on God and everything else, you know, they hadn't done anything. But Mama said, did you do so-and-so? I said, yes, ma'am, I did it. I've always been one to admit what I did, even as a child. Now, why, I don't know, but I have. But I enjoyed school. I love school. I love books, reading, learning. I mean, loved it. And that's what I did in my spare time. I mean, and as a child, I never asked for anything. You know, we didn't have a lot of toys and stuff like that. The only thing I ever asked for was like school stuff, a notebook or paper. And Mama always made a way, no matter if she didn't have no money to get it for me. She pushed my education. And that was my life. Working fields, studying, reading, cutting up wood for old people, toting things to old people. Whatever they needed me to do, that was it. And that was my life.
Old people would tell Eddie, honey, it's been like this 200 years, and it's gonna be like this. There ain't gonna be no change. But see, Eddie knew anything could be changed if people wanted it to change, because he'd been taught that, he learned that, and he believed that.
When I met Eddie, I came to work for the Tuscarora tribe. We moved our office in where Presbyterian ministry was operating. They had a food bank and clothes, and Eddie was volunteering with this minister, John Robinson. And I began to talk to him, and I found out he was doing this voluntarily, not getting a dime. They give him some food, and that was it. I said, Eddie Hatcher works here all the time. I said, isn't there some way you can get some money for him? And she says, well, you know, I hadn't thought of that, but I'll try. So they started paying him $50 a week. And he was so proud of that $50. He was a big fellow then. And he didn't drive or anything. He had nothing to drive, so he was always calling on me to take him play. We became very close.
A thing that you have to understand about Robeson County is it is split by Interstate 95. And that's the Miami to New York pipeline. What comes into Miami gets moved north. And for years that's been drugs. I'd say given some of the things that we know about Robeson County, the climate there was, well, there are plenty of people maybe just desperate enough to try their hand in helping to move some of these drugs north or south.
I had a lot of contacts. So one of our contacts was an old friend of ours who was a DEA and reasonably high up in DEA. And we asked him about Robeson County. And he called us back in a day or so after checking around, and he said, it is a county that is so treacherous we will not put one of our agents in there. Hubert Stone, who was the sheriff at the time and had been the sheriff for some time before and some time after that, is very smooth. Oh, yes. You know, Mr. So-and-so, come in, sit down, and have a cup of coffee. I'm glad you're here. Oh, this is wonderful. But ask him a question or push at all, and he would just deflect it. He was never belligerent, but for example, we asked to interview a certain random people in jail. The jail was a terrible place at that time. They have a new jail now, but and he said, well, I'll have to ask the prosecutor, Mr. Britt, if that would be okay. Well, those people are not Britt's prisoners, they're your prisoners. Well, I know that, Mr. Geiger, but I just want to be careful. And he would go and check with Britt to see what we could do.
Well, you had a lot of unrest that was generated by the Jimmy Earl Cummings shooting, and the way that things were handled, the the coroner's inquest, that, the way that was handled, it created a lot of questions, a lot of people's minds, and a lot of questions that are not answered today and never will be answered, I guess.
And in the telling of things, it became absolutely clear to me that the sheriff's department was corrupt, that they were involved in drug trafficking, that they were probably involved directly or indirectly in some homicides.
One night, on a rural back road, Jimmy Earl Cummings, a suspected drug dealer, was pulled over by Sheriff Hubert Stone's son, Deputy Kevin Stone. Cummings allegedly swung a plastic bucket at Stone. Stone fired, killing Cummings. A hastily called coroner's inquest determined the shooting to have been either accidental or an act of self-defense. A great many Robeson County residents were disturbed by the ruling.
Around that time, there had been a safe robbery involving a fellow named Hugh James Bullard, and we knew about that. And it was sort of a setup job where the person that owned the safe wanted to collect a good size of insurance money. So he tells Bullard and another cohort of Bullard that if you come to my place of business at a certain time, you'll find this safe, and you'll find inside something like $14,000, I think, and some cocaine, and you can have everything that's in there, and then I will claim that there was $250,000 and get the insurance. That was sort of the scam that was underway. Well, after they actually get the safe and tear it apart, they find the stuff in there, but they also find a bunch of other things. And they're basically functional illiterates and didn't know what it was, but they knew it was something interesting because two Robeson County sheriff officers and a North Carolina state policeman come to Bullard and say, what was in that safe? And I didn't get this, what I'm telling you now, I didn't get this from Hatcher. I got this from 15 interviews with Bullard and other people. And those people came to Bullard and literally beat the hell out of him. And they didn't ask about the cocaine. They didn't ask about the safe. They didn't ask about the $14,000. They wanted to know what happened to those other papers that was in that safe. Well, isn't that curious? And Bullard was a guy who lived by his wits, and he had taken care of those papers, let's put it that way, and was able to convince them that he had burned them, which he hadn't. And I think some of that stuff perhaps ended up with Hatcher somehow.
There were 3 maps. One detailed a drop zone coming from Dillon, South Carolina, into a hayfield in Robeson County. It had roads lined out on the way it came in out through South Carolina. The second map had it was like a triangle, from a hierarchy, from the bottom big drug dealers up to the top men, and it listed 35. The third map detailed some activity from Robeson to Dunn, which we found out here in the last couple of years has had major drug trafficking. There's 19 business people that were arrested and Dunn. And this is 88, and I had maps showing major activity from Robeson County to Dunn. It was during that time that they found out that I had this. When I say they, I'm referring to the sheriff's department. So I went into hiding.
When he came there, he had those maps. And I went to the freezer. We had to think of some place to hide them. And I went to the freezer and moved the frozen foods all where I could. Went as far down as we could go and put those in a plastic, I put them in plastic bags and put them in the freezer and covered them up with the frozen food. And he left, and a little while I got a phone call from my son, a couple hours, and my granddaughter had gone back to Charlotte and called her daddy and told him she didn't know what was going on. But I had borrowed her car, and I'd brought a man to the house, had called me to pick him up, and she knew something was going on, and we had turned out the lights. And of course Jimmy called me and he said, "Mother, what's happening? Who's there with you?" And I said, "Eddie." He knew I was involved with Eddie. I said, Eddie's here with me. And he got so up in the air with me. He said, Mother, I thought you knew better. He said, all the people that's being killed in Robeson County and you don't know who's killing them. He said, don't you know it could happen to you?
I was snuck out of the county by two ministers, two reputable ministers in the county. They snuck me out on a Sunday night and took me to Durham, put me in a motel room. And I met with some people up there, Christian Institute, NCARV, and we were all trying to figure out what to do.
We of course asked him to tell us, you know, what do you mean some maps? Where did you get the maps? Who did you talk to? What do you know? And he was forthcoming in describing that, and it seemed to be a very credible process carried out by a person who was involved in other activities also.
I was not liked by law enforcement. And I guess when this got out about me having these maps, I just gave them what they figured to go ahead. They could do what they wanted to with me.
In fact, I'm not even sure what sort of advice we told him other than you need to be very careful about thinking that you can seek refuge with the federal authorities because you feel that the sheriff and the county and local authorities are involved. Our experience in this other case is you may not be safe to run with that information to the federal authorities. And to be careful because we knew of killings and bombings, and it was, you know, it's a serious money and serious business and serious consequences for people who wanted to expose that stuff.
Hatcher was warned by friends that he was being followed by Kevin Stone, the sheriff's deputy who had killed Jimmy Earl Cummings. Isolated in his apartment, Hatcher plotted a dramatic response.
Friday, I was by myself in my apartment all day. The only people I talked to was, like I said, my landlord would come up and let me know when Kevin Stone was watching my apartment. I bought a pistol, had it brought to me, a 38, the same 38 I used in Takeover. I stayed in all day. I'd look out the windows, watch TV, and Friday I started writing some things up I was going to leave after I decided I was going to take over something, like a wheel. I wrote up a couple of articles. Just sat there, that's all I did, watching and looking, with my pistol laid right beside me. Saturday was basically the same thing until that evening when Timmy came. When he came, and then I couldn't get rid of him, and I was afraid to let him go. We sat there and we watched TV and we talked. I kept stressing to him how it would be when we got in there. He couldn't listen to nobody. He had to stay alert, or he'd get killed. I stressed to him once we went in, we couldn't come out until we got what we wanted. I kept putting this in his head, talking to him, going over and over and over. Sunday, that was basically the same thing. I kept drilling him, drilling him, drilling him. Because he was young, and I didn't know what he might would do. And that's basically the whole weekend. What I did was sit there with my pistol and talk to him and made out my will and my plans. I went in at 9 o'clock, chained the doors. I told Timmy, I said, you go that way. It had a circular, it had offices that circled around. I said, you go that way, get them all to the front, and I'll go this way.
First I thought it was a robbery, but soon found out it was not, and they lined people around walls and they had shotguns.
Once I got them all to the front, I moved them to the center newsroom because that was the safest place to be. That left them the reception area out front where they couldn't come in on us, and that left the back copy room where they couldn't come in, you know, where we was in the middle. And I just told them all, I said, you know, the first 45 minutes hectic. They were all lined up. I told them, weren't there to hurt anybody, but nobody was leaving. One old woman, she started crying. She was getting real hysterical. So within 40 minutes, I let her go. She left. I told her she had to go. You know, she was getting on my nerves.
Well, Joanne and Deborah and Mary Ann and Ricky McKinnon and Roy Neal Cox, Eric Pravat's in there.
Oh, did they get Eric?
Yeah, Eric Pravat's in there. And
That's only about 3 or 4 minutes before the
Eric Ziegler and Renee out advertising and Larry Blue and Donna Pikes and Bob Horn.
Do you know what they want?
Yeah.
They just want to talk to the governor, and they won't stop with nothing else.
Well, that's what I understand.
The 17.
How many pieces? Is it one man with a gun in there?
There's two.
There's two. Two?
Two with guns.
Two with outside.
Hand grenades.
Okay, do you see hand grenades?
No, but they're on the doors. If anybody goes to the door.
We're trying to get her up to the EMT. She's having heart pains.
Oh, they didn't. Oh, they didn't.
News media were calling in from all over the world. And at some point, he seemed to realize what a public relations bonanza or exposure that he had available with all these news media calling in. At first, he wouldn't talk to anybody, and we couldn't talk to anybody, and then he started instructing us to talk to people.
Throughout the day, it was real hectic. I mean, it was real tense. I spent most of the day on the telephone. I talked so much my ear actually ached that evening. Most of the conversation was interviews with reporters from all over the world, from Australia, Japan, Germany, South America, every European country, all over the United States. I mean, they were constantly back-to-back coming in, and this is what I was doing all day long, standing there with my guns and giving interviews. First time I went to the reception area, I eased down and went out there. It was about 45 minutes after the takeover, and I could see people everywhere with guns, everywhere, on buildings, everywhere. And that was just one side. I couldn't see the other three sides. Then I had people calling me, telling me what was going on outside. Eddie, they got the SWAT team down here. Eddie, Fort Bragg weapons specialist, just arrived in some kind of big van. So these people were supporting me. I don't know who they were. I have no idea. But they were calling me and letting me know every move that's being made on the outside. And I'd get on the phone through the command center, and they'd wonder how in the hell I knew this. They didn't cut the phone lines. They said they thought it would agitate me if they cut the phone lines, and it would have. So they didn't. But I had people all day calling, anonymous people, telling me every move that was being made outside, whether they were shifting more men here, what they was doing, and which I appreciated. You know, it kind of let me know where we was at. I knew they wouldn't shoot in that building with those people in there. I knew that. I knew they couldn't ambush it. They couldn't rush it. There's no way. If they tried to come through the chain locked doors, I'd be on them before they'd be on me. The steel doors in the back were solid steel with a steel bar through them. There's no way they could come through them. We had all the windows covered up with cardboard. They couldn't see inside. So they were at a handicap. I was not at a handicap. In fact, the FBI made a statement after it was over that they thought I was professional because it had been done so quickly and so good. They thought I had been trained professionally to do that. But I hadn't. I was done what common sense tells you to do. If you want to take over something, there's certain things you have to do. That's common sense. I was willing to fire back had I been fired on. I done made my mind up that I would do that. If they attempted to come through the doors, I would shoot. In fact, I came close one time when they were crawling right up there to the door at the reception office. And I was on the phone. I told them, I said, you better get them back. I'm fixing to shoot. And they got them back. I was prepared to defend myself. I was prepared to hold out at least to get some of the demands met that I thought were needed. I'd have held out longer. I don't know how long I could have held out, but I was willing to go longer. I was willing to go in and get what I went in for. That's the point I was willing to go.
Nobody wanted to go outside because you didn't know what you faced if you ever opened the door. So you felt, I guess, as safe in there with them as you did opening the door and not knowing what you faced out from the outside.
About 12 o'clock, I told Sidney we had to have something to eat. Or John Godwin. I told John Godwin. He said, well, what you want? I said, I hollered everybody in there. I said, what y'all want to eat? Somebody said, what about Burger King? So I told him, I said, we want Burger King. He said, okay. So they went and got a big box full of Whoppers and drinks. And I told him, I said, Mr. John, I said, ain't nobody putting nothing in none of that. He said, no. He said, Eddie, I went and got that, and I brought it here. He said, nobody's messed with it. And so then Sidney said, well, look, Eddie, said the SBI here is wanting to know if you'll trade a hostage for the food. Well, there was two women that was really, they weren't really nervous all, but, there was a little. So I told them, I said, well, y'all can go out. So when they went out, one of them set the box of food back inside the building. Well, that was 2 more women that was gone. By that time, there'd been at least 6 women I'd let go by 12 o'clock. So they ate Burger King. I didn't eat. I'd brought me some cheese crackers because I done made up my mind I wouldn't trust anything they sent in to eat. So I ate cheese crackers, and they ate Burger King. It was all right. Nobody, didn't bother nobody.
Well, things calmed down, and about half the people had been released, and at some point, with all the news media calling in, and I decided that maybe that maybe I should think like a journalist, and Timmy Jacobs agreed to be interviewed. I interviewed him later in the afternoon, and Eddie never would agree to be interviewed, but he finally agreed to make a statement, you know, into a tape recorder. So I took his statement. I also took pictures of both of them. Sort of subversively in a way. I mean, I just went and got a camera and just took it up, took a picture right quickly, not trying to call attention, but they realized what I was doing, and they didn't object. So, but main thing was I think was getting Phil Kirk on the line, somebody from the governor's office.
I trusted Phil. I trust Phil now. I believe that's the reason he got out of politics, because it's too crooked. He weren't made for it. He really wanted to help. I believe that. He wanted that thing to be over, and he was willing to do whatever he could do.
I believe that I'm a people person. I think I can get along with most anybody, and I think I'm also a lucky person. Sometimes I didn't panic, and I wanted to make sure that Eddie didn't panic and hurt somebody, and so I think I sort of had a calm, reasonable voice. And plus, if there were problems in Robeson County that the governor needed to be aware of or had the authority to do something about, I wanted us to try to help. So I had a lot of goals in mind, but the main goal was that nobody get hurt, including Eddie and including the hostages.
There's only 4 demands. That somebody investigate the unsolved murders in the county and the judicial system. They investigate the law enforcement for drug trafficking. They investigate the death of a young black man that had just died in the county jail, Billy McCullough, and that I not be turned over to local authorities. When we got close to the end of ending it, Sidney Locks, who was a representative, state representative, he was one of the negotiators. He said, "Eddie, you're not going to ask for amnesty or nothing?" I said, "Well, no." I said, "That's all I want is them 4 things." I said, I'll take my chances, you know, and go on with what I've got to face. A lot of people were surprised I didn't try to ask for no amnesty, but I wasn't even thinking about no amnesty. I just wanted those 4, the guarantee that those were going to be met.
For various reasons, Eddie had a strong dislike and distrust, maybe a better word, for law enforcement in the area. And so he wanted sort of more of an independent group. And I don't remember how it all transpired, but I finally agreed that I would head up a study, and that we'd have the governor's legal counsel and some other people involved. But I also, as I recall, pointed out to him that I had not been trained as an investigator. So all I could do would be to offer an opportunity for people to come forward and give me information. It seemed like his main concern was drug dealing in the county, but there was also some concern about how some Indian people had been treated by law enforcement.
As darkness approached, the governor's office agreed to Hatcher's demands with a signed agreement flown by helicopter to Lumberton.
They met my demands, and even though I didn't want to surrender, if I hadn't, I'd look like a liar, and I didn't want to be a liar. I gave them demands. They agreeing now and saying they're going to meet them, so I got to surrender. There's no other way around it. Well, we started talking about how we were going to do it, how we were going to come out. That's when the SBI got on.
When the release came, Tom Childress, who was the SBI negotiator, talked to me on the phone and wanted me to ensure that they had emptied their weapons, and then I was to signify that to the negotiator, and then they were to throw their weapons, empty weapons out, and I was supposed to ensure that they, I guess I frisked them to ensure that they didn't have any concealed weapons, and then they went out.
Then the last part would be I would go to the door and turn around backwards and walk out backwards with my hands up, which I didn't like. I just knew one of them local police was going to shoot me.
Somebody called in or something and said that they were going to gun them down, and I guess I went out with them to ensure that that didn't happen. Yeah, I forgot about that because that wouldn't have been right.
So before I agreed to do any of this, I made them have the highway patrol circle 2 city blocks 3 times, announcing over his loudspeaker that by orders of the governor, no shots are to be fired. And they did this. So then I followed the procedures we'd set out, and I did each step by step. There's crowds of people out there hollering and shouting, people all over, media all over, helicopters all overhead. It was tense.
I was on the line with somebody down there on the ground, somebody in law enforcement, and the person, you know, said the hostages were coming out of the building or so on, and I felt some relief. And then Timothy Jacobs, I believe, came out, and then Eddie came out, and when I got the word on that, then I just broke down and actually sat on the floor and cried for a while.
Kunstler and I got a telephone call, and I don't remember if it was from some member of the support crew or whatever, asking us if we would be interested in this case, and we said, yeah, great. It sounds absolutely fascinating. And we went down to Robeson County, and it was sort of an amazing experience. I mean, look, Bill Kunstler had traveled all through the South in the 1960s. He'd seen crummy, little, corrupt towns presided over by Yahoo redneck sheriffs. I mean, that was sort of the motif of much of the 60s, but none of us had ever seen anything like Robeson County. The statistic, I think, that stuck out most starkly in our minds was that Robeson County had a higher per capita murder rate than El Salvador. And this was at a time when the movement in El Salvador was at its peak. The fighting was the most intense. Death squads drove through the streets with impunity. And they had a higher murder rate than El Salvador. And we were absolutely amazed at that whole situation down there. This is just one sort of slightly chubby guy. He was not Rambo. He wasn't a martial arts expert, and he didn't have thousands of supporters sort of waiting in the wings to free him. Massive security, you know, armed guards everywhere, machine guns out. It was insane, and I'm thinking, you know, all this for what? And Eddie was in grave danger throughout this whole hostage siege of either killing somebody or more likely dying in a hail of gunfire himself. So I was expecting somebody, you know, who was a little crazier than the Eddie Hatcher I met. Eddie was surprisingly down to earth. In fact, that was probably his most down to earth moment. was there in the holding cell when he began to evaluate his case very rationally.
Weapons, 2 counts of weapons and explosives, because I told them I had the doors with a hand grenade. Even though I didn't, they charged me with it. I was charged with 2 weapon counts, conspiracy. I was charged with conspiracy to commit overt acts against the United States of America, and I was charged with federal terrorism, hostage taking. I was the first person in this country to be charged under Reagan's Anti-Terrorist Act, the 1984 I was the first person ever. And then I realized how big this situation was.
And like a lot of political defendants, Eddie wanted to be the master of his legal strategy. This wasn't going to be a not guilty by reason of insanity. This wasn't going to be a Prozac defense. This was going to be a political defense based on necessity, based on justification. And we sat down and began to craft that defense for him.
With little to no budget and no security measures, because you have to have protection from people who have the capability to provide security, we tried to investigate that drug traffic. And we chased lead after lead, and it's very hard to pin down. We got some very significant information. We had federal prosecutors in the newspaper stating why Robeson County is, quote, awash in cocaine, end quote. We had newspaper articles about social workers describing preschool kids who was part of their play in Robeson County was to mimic cutting up bales of drugs and weighing them. But we did obtain things like affidavits from 2 ministers in Robeson County. While they couldn't tell names of their parishioners, they would describe situations when the people in their church would come to them and acknowledge being involved in drugs and tell of a particular scenario of a deputy sheriff coming to their car and saying, I can arrest you now or you can make your payoff. And we had several incidences like that. So we were, at least from our personal perspective, we were morally convinced that the if you will, the story or the presentation that Eddie and Timothy had about what was happening there was credible and true. And we were going to try our best to try to present that, even though we're going to have a hard time getting a person to come from Robeson County who knew anything credibly and sit on a stand in a federal court in Raleigh and swear that it was true, realizing that they could A, get prosecuted or get killed.
Unfortunately, Bill was involved in another case, not a very long trial. He just needed an adjournment for a fairly short period of time so that he could come down to Robeson County and try the case. And the amazing thing was this happens all the time. I mean, Bill Kunstler was a very much sought-after lawyer. And so it's not unusual for us to have trials sort of backed up like airplanes in a holding pattern in an airport. And you do one, then you do another, and everybody makes accommodations. Well, not this judge.
Now, at this time, Eddie was being held in, had been held in preventive detention, but a panel of the Court of Appeals had ordered his release because of procedural errors in the preventive detention.
And then I was sitting on a toilet on a Saturday morning on July the 1st, and a jailer came running up to my door and said, Eddie, he said, your New York lawyer's on the phone. He said something about you made a bond. Well, see, Bill had always told me, he said, Eddie, when we get to the 4th Circuit, you'll get a bond. I said, yeah, Bill. You know, I didn't believe it. Well, I run down there to the telephone. He said, guess what? He said, I just got the order from the 4th Circuit. They're ordering you released forthwith. You got a bond.
Almost 5 months to the day that Hatcher and Jacobs were ordered jailed without bond, the 2 Tuscarora Indians were released on a technicality. After a U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled, the 2 Indians had been denied a speedy bond detention hearing after their February 1st arrest.
This has been a major case. It's a powerful event we've seen today. It affects not just us, people all over in preventive detention. It's a major issue.
Now, supporters only hope that the 2 men can complete what they say a state task force has failed to accomplish. That is to substantiate allegations of corruption in Robeson County.
The government sought to prevent these men from standing up in public forums and speaking their mind and denouncing drug trafficking. They tried to put them under house arrest and shut them up and shut them down, and we were able to defeat that attempt, and these people will walk out of this courthouse with the same constitutional rights as everybody else.
But then the full Court of Appeals overturned the panel, and Eddie was ordered back into custody. I thought Eddie was entitled to a hearing before he was ordered back into custody, and I tried to arrange a hearing. Judge Boyle refused to provide one. He simply ordered Eddie back into custody. Eddie then fled.
So I went to meet my federal probation officer like I was supposed to, and I left to come on back to the house. Well, as soon as I got back to the house, the phone rang. And I picked it up, and it was that federal parole officer. He said, Eddie, he said, I need you to come back up here. He said, there's some papers I need to go over with you. As soon as he said that, I knew they'd revoked our bond. I knew it. Didn't have to ask nobody or nothing. I said, well, I just made me a sandwich. I said, I changed clothes. I said, well, let me put my clothes back on, eat a sandwich. I said, I'll be there in about 10 minutes. He said, well, he said, okay. There was a boy sitting there to come see me. I hung the phone up. I said, let's go. He said, what? I said, let's go. I grabbed a toothbrush and an address book. I got him to take me to the Commission of Indian Affairs office in the back and let me out in the back. And I walked in, the secretary worked there, Miss Wynn, I knew her. I said, I need to get Chapel Hill right now, right this minute. She could see something wrong. She said, hold on. She told her boss, says, I got to go to Chapel Hill. I'll be back in a few minutes. So we got in her car, and she took me and dropped me off right up above the Internationalist bookstore. Well, I walked down there, and Shelton was working there, Bob Shelton. I walked in, I didn't talk. I took a piece of paper, and I wrote down, I said, my bond has been revoked. I need to get to Onondaga in New York. He looked at me for a minute. He done like this. He took me, they had a little room back there then. Had a bunch of shirts hanging up. He pulled them wild psychedelic shirts off and handed it to me to put on, an old hat. And we walked outside. He said, you go down there to Tijuana Fats and get you a table and get you a drink, and I'll be down there in a little while. So that's what I did. I went down there and sat and drank a few drinks. About 45 minutes, him and two girls come in. We took a back table. He said, Eddie, he said, these girls are going to get you out of state. I said, okay, I never met them before, never seen them in my life, didn't know nothing about them or nothing. They took me to a big old house in Chapel Hill. There's about 5 college girls living there. They took me in making cookies, and we was deciding how they was going to get me out. So they decided they'd take me to Washington, D.C. and put me on a train on up to New York. Well, about 5:30, I called WRAL and asked for Nina Schlossberg. And the woman on the other end says, she's in Robertson County. I said, is this Eddie? It was Adele Arakawa. I said, yeah. I said, this is Eddie. She said, where are you? I said, why? She said, oh, there's just a nationwide APB hat on you, that's all. I said, I'll get with you later. So I hung up. I told them girls, I said, look, there's a nationwide APB. I said, we got to move right now. So I laid down in the back seat of the car, and they took me to Washington, D.C. After we got out the road, you know, I set up and everything, but they stopped at the store and bought me a rabbit. What was that movie, Rabbit, something other? Anyway, they bought me another T-shirt at a store, convenience store somewhere. We got to D.C. by the time we left, it was about 8. We got to D.C. about 2. They took me to the Amtrak station. Now, again, these are girls I've never met before, but they knew about my case and my struggle. They gave me money. They bought my ticket. They bought me anything, what little things that I needed. And even told me they was going to send Mama some flowers with a note so she would know I was all right. Because, see, Mama was in Durham Hospital, just had back surgery. So they put me on a train at 3 o'clock. I got in New York about 7.
So, 10:30 in the morning, not too long after Eddie Hatcher disappears, the phone rings in the office, and I hear Eddie's distinctly accented voice saying, Ron, hi, it's me, Eddie. And it's like, Eddie! You know, and he says, Ron, I know you're angry at me, but, you know, you got to understand, we got to talk. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'm thinking, wherever he is, I can catch an airplane, we can meet there. He says, Ron, I'm just down the street. He's in New York City. He's in Greenwich Village. Now, look, the FBI is not an organization composed entirely of idiots, okay? And I'm sure somebody sat down and figured out, gee, where would he go? We have some ideas. Well, one place he might go is to his lawyer's office in New York City. Maybe we ought to send somebody from the New York Bureau out to take a look, just sort of stake out the office. And it's like, oh, shit. So I leave immediately and walk down the street to the Waverly coffee shop. And there's Eddie, you know, standing there in a bright lime green T-shirt that says, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I mean, you know, if anybody is looking for him, he might as well be holding a great big sign, you know, saying, hi, I'm a federal fugitive. If you're looking for me, call. Absolutely. I said, Eddie, Jesus. So I take him in and buy him coffee. And at this point, as a lawyer, you have to be fairly concerned.
He said, well, Eddie, he said, you realize they're looking for you pretty hard. I said, are they? He said, oh, yeah. He said, your picture's done been posted. I said, Ron, I just left last night. He said, well, he said, your picture's on the post office boxes. I said, damn. He said, what are you going to do, Eddie? I said, I don't know. I said, but I'm not going to trial without Bill.
And then we spent a lot of time talking, and Eddie was genuinely terrified and very much was afraid that he wasn't going to have a fair trial. And we talked frankly about his ability to live as a fugitive, and given his penchant for dramatic public demonstrations, I really didn't think he had much of a career as a fugitive. I thought he was better off as a defendant.
So I stayed there another night, and we kept trying to figure what to do, and I finally told him I'm going to Onondaga.
Hatcher sought refuge on the Onondaga Indian Reservation in New York State.
So 2 days later is when I got on the bus and went to Syracuse. And I was met by some of the chiefs from Onondaga. They had already knew, but they'd been down here about my case. So they took me down to Onondaga, and I stayed there. I went before the council, and they granted me sanctuary. I could have stayed. They wanted me to stay. But when they said what they done, the government pulled a very clever move. They set an arraignment. See, I'd never had an arraignment. They set an arraignment, and if you don't appear at your arraignment, it's automatic 10 years. No trial or nothing. If you don't appear, you get a 10-year sentence. So Barry said, well, Eddie, what you gonna do now? I said, damn, Barry. I said, there ain't no way to get out of it. He said, no, sir. He says it's a very adroit move they made, Eddie. He said, they flushing you out. You got to come out, or either you can never come out. So if you ever come out, you're going to get 10 years no matter what.
You're on the phone to Barry.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, I'd been on the phone to Geraldo. He wanted me to surrender on his show. Well, Bill didn't like that idea. I wish now I had have done it. See, what he was going to do was going to have me on his show and let me give my whole story, and in about 20 minutes before it's over, he was going to call the marshals, say, here he is, come in and get him, and arrest me on the show. But Bill didn't like that idea. But now, many times, I wished I'd have still done it. Bill says, well, Eddie, says, what we're going to do, says, we're going to set it up to have the press at the Raleigh Airport. And says, you and Ron and Stephanie's going to fly back at 1:30 on Monday. And the press will be at the airport waiting on you when you get there. I said, well, in the meantime, Barry worked it out with the marshals that if I got there before 3 o'clock, they would allow me to walk into the courtroom without handcuffs. And then after the hearing, then they would detain me. Do you believe the plane we was leaving on all of a sudden was 45 minutes late leaving? Out of the blue. Nobody knew what was wrong. So I got here after 3 o'clock. So I was apprehended at the airport.
So I appeared in court. I didn't know about what was going on. I didn't know Eddie had been arrested. I was looking for him to arrive. The judge refused to continue the hearing until Eddie got there. The U.S. attorney announced that they had taken Eddie into custody, but suggested they were bringing him to court. I asked Judge Boyle to wait till Eddie got there. He refused. He entered a not guilty plea on behalf of Eddie in his absence, and he scheduled a trial date. The judge set the trial date for a date that he knew Kunstler could not be there. I told him that we objected, that there was no reason not to delay the trial further, that Eddie was in custody. He was willing to stay in custody in order to have Bill Kunstler as his chief trial counsel. The government had no concern otherwise. Timmy was in custody. They had no problem. The only prejudice anybody would suffer from a delay is that Eddie and Timmy would have to sit in custody for a longer period of time, and both agreed. Nevertheless, the judge set the trial date for whatever date it was in September, when Bill Kunstler was known that he would still be in that trial.
When the trial started, Bill told me, he said, Eddie, said, you do just like Bobby Seale. He said, except, he said, Bobby Seale was demanding to represent himself. He said, you demanding to have your counsel of choice. He said, so you stand up every 2 or 3 minutes and you say that. I demand to have my counsel of choice. You deny me my counsel of choice. And that's what I did for 2 weeks. I'd stand every 2 minutes. Oh, and it was getting on their nerves so bad they couldn't stand it. I mean, I'd interrupt everything, you know. And Boyle would threaten me with contempt. And I say, contempt? I said, what you gonna do, lock me up? I'm already in jail. You know, what are you gonna do?
Eddie appearing without counsel was a very significant aspect of the case. And it was very symbolic and very poignant to the jury. The jury picked up on the symbolism of Eddie appearing in that case unrepresented. There was never any explanation of why, except that whenever Judge Boyle called on Eddie to do something during the prosecution case, Eddie simply said, I'm being denied my constitutional right to counsel in violation of the Sixth Amendment, and he refused to do any more. And he was very polite and courteous for Eddie.
And so what we tried to craft was a case whereby Eddie would show up and would be his own lawyer at trial, and repeatedly tell the jury that the judge wouldn't let him have a lawyer. Eddie would continue to be the class clown, the bad boy, the perpetual, what am I doing here? Why is this happening? All we're trying to do is, you know, secure some justice. And Timmy, meantime, would put on the technical legal defense. And instead of the two being pitted against each other or at odds with each other. The two would work together and maximize everybody's chances, because Eddie could speak to this jury in an authentic way.
One of the tactics that the federal prosecutors had used is that prior to the trial, they had filed a motion called a motion in limine asking the federal judge, I think it was Judge Boyle, to prohibit us from making any reference to any duress or necessity defense. So what happened is that Judge Boyle just delayed ruling on that motion as the trial began. So there was this pending motion which at any point could sort of drop the gag on us to get at what was our main and our only defense, was the duress or necessity. And each time we would elicit from a witness something about the drug trafficking in the community, the racial violence, because the issues wrapped into why they did this involved a killing or a murder in the jail where a person of color was denied the medicine that they needed. It involved the racial brutality and inhumane way that people in Robeson County, mainly the poor folks, had been treated. So it was more than just drugs. Drugs was sort of destroying that community, as was the economic oppression and literally physical brutality. At the close of the government's case, the judge made a ruling. He granted their motion in limine, ruled that our duress necessity defense was not applicable in this case, and prohibited us from referring to it in our argument or in our case.
So after 2 weeks, I told Bill, I said, look, Bill, I said, now this jury's got to hear me. They have got to hear me now. He said, well, you're right. He said, you've already done enough for appeal. He said, you've already been long enough that we got a good appeal. He said, you start defending yourself. I said, okay. So that third week, they were arguing about something. They'd been telling me all along, see, oh, Mr. Hatcher, you can represent yourself now. You can do this. I jumped up and I said, well, I said, since y'all going to make me represent myself, then I'm going to. I called Cleo Locklear to the stand. Boy, John Bruce jumped up. He can't do this. He can't. I said, you said I had to represent myself. Well, that threw them off a loop. They weren't expecting that. And then when I jumped up and started defending myself, they didn't know what to do. I mean, boy, the judge and the prosecutors looking at each other like, you know, what do we do now? So I started calling witnesses.
One other witness was a minister. Eddie had gone to his house to hide one night when he was afraid. The minister had pulled down all the curtains, closed all the drapes, locked all the doors, let Eddie sleep on his couch. And in the morning, he asked Eddie to leave, and was very careful about getting Eddie out, taking care with the charts and maps that Eddie had. And this minister was just a very lovable man, just a very popular minister and a wonderful person, and just exuded goodness. And he walked to the stand, took the oath, and sat down, and Eddie started asking questions. And every question the U.S. attorney objected to, and the judge sustained the objection. And this went on for 4 or 5 questions. And finally the minister turned to the judge and said, Your Honor, can't I just tell my story? And the jury broke out in applause. That's what they wanted. And the judge looked at them and said, all right, go ahead.
People began to realize that something was very much amiss in Robeson County. The governor, even belatedly and with much hemming and hawing, recognized that there was something very much amiss in Robeson County. These weren't fantasies, and however clumsily or dangerously Eddie Hatcher brought this to public attention, I mean, thank God he brought it to public attention, and the government's inability to acknowledge any of that, I think affected a lot of people. I think it affected the jurors. They didn't like the arrogance of the federal government. Big surprise, right? They didn't like the rudeness. They didn't like the basic nastiness.
So he stood up there to deliver his closing argument, and he read what I'd prepared, and then he delivered his own extemporaneously, and it brought a tear to every eye, except, of course, FBI agents and the U.S. attorney. But every person in the jury was in tears. You've probably seen the argument, as I remember him saying, talking about how frightened he was during this time, how abandoned he felt, the efforts that he made to try to get law enforcement attention to these people he contacted, the efforts he made to get the FBI He went through law enforcement agents he knew. He approached a police officer in Pembroke who was terrified about this. Indeed, drove him home one night and then kept checking to make sure Eddie got upstairs all right. When the lights didn't come on, became afraid. And yet that police officer didn't feel he had any way to use the information Eddie had and protect him. So Eddie talked about all of this and talked about how he felt abandoned. And of course, he was talking from a position where he had no counsel, and he talked about that. He was denied his right to counsel. He'd been abandoned in that respect. And he talked some about the conditions in Robeson County that the evidence had showed, and he ended up by saying there are 40,000 Indians in Robeson County who are abandoned. Don't abandon me. That was powerful. He was beautiful. And I was sure the jury couldn't convict him.
So we go out there, I'm sitting at the big table with myself, the judge has got 2 pieces of paper, he's looking at him, and his face is so red, he just looks like he's gonna have a stroke. He said, Timothy Jacobs, stand up. So Timmy stood up, and he says, the jury has found you not guilty on all counts. Well, a bunch of people in the audience hollered. I'm still sitting there looking at him. Well, he sits there and he keeps looking. He waits about 2 minutes. Nobody says a word. And I'm sitting there, the jury's looking at me, and I'm looking at them. One of them smiles at me. I knew then what it was. He said, Mr. Hatcher, stand up. So I stood up. He said, the jury has found you, and he stopped, like he didn't even want to say it. Not guilty on all counts. And I just looked over at the jury and done like that.
We're obviously disappointed in the result. However, I have never criticized publicly a jury decision or a court decision, and I don't intend to start now. I have to view it as a failure of advocacy on my part.
Going to carry on your fight?
Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Let the Lord lead you.
He took care of you, didn't he?
Yeah. When I got outside, 2 of the jurors ran up to me and hugged me. One of them was Patience Brannock, I think, lives in North Carolina. She grabbed me, a little old lady, about 60-something years old. She grabbed me, she hugged me, she was crying. She says, Eddie, be a good boy and don't get in no more trouble.
After the acquittal, I advised Eddie to stay out of Robeson County, stay far away for quite a while. Eddie, of course, felt that he had been found not guilty, that he hadn't any reason to stay out of Robeson County. He was anxious to get back to his organizing. He was eager to get back to the organizing.
We began to sit down, and Eddie was very instrumental in this, coming up with some plan to organize. All along we thought, if you've got the majority, this is America, democracy, the majority should prevail and have their say. How do we do that? How do we get people to overcome the fear or apathy and get registered to vote and elect a different sheriff, a different county commissioners? And we came up with a plan, which was to generate a petition that was based on a specific North Carolina statute. It says you can petition to have I think either a sheriff or law enforcement official, but I think it's a sheriff, removed from office. Now you have to get signatures on it, and then you have to turn it over to the district attorney, which may have been a big problem given the problems with the district attorney that had been there. But it was at least a mechanism to involve the citizens. So we were trying to create participatory democracy for Robeson County. One of the most important tenets of our work at Christic Institute South was the notion that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something you have, it's something you do. And it appeared to us that the reason people in Robeson County weren't doing democracy was intimidation.
The district attorney, Joe Freeman Britt, started making statements to the effect that he was opening the investigation of the takeover and that he was investigating a conspiracy in the takeover. Now, I knew, because I had read all the FBI and SBI reports and ATF reports, I knew that they had already thoroughly investigated the question of conspiracy and found that, as was the truth, there wasn't a conspiracy. Eddie and Timmy had done this on their own. And that was pretty well established. I also got information about the investigation that they were carrying out.
Well, I think there's some conspiracy behind it.
For what purpose?
benefit themselves sometimes, other people.
SBI agents were going and talking to people, not about a conspiracy in the takeover, but about the organization that was going on at the time. And they were doing it in a harassing and intimidating manner.
The State Bureau of Investigation began to, quote, investigate state charges that may arise from the takeover. And they made it a big point to announce in the newspapers that they were looking at February the 1st from the perspective of conspiracy. That meant whoever may have been even talking with, or maybe at that time, after the fact, talking with Eddie or Timothy, may be involved in some criminal prosecution. So it had the effect of chilling out the petition drive. It was harassing the people in response for exercising their First Amendment rights. Then there was, well, we may do an indictment, may do a state court indictment. They did, in fact, return indictments for, it seemed like it was 14 multiple counts of kidnapping for the very same incident now, that the people had been gone to trial, faced 2 weeks of trial, and found not guilty.
SBI agents, about 10 or 12 of them, rushed in the office and told me I was under arrest for 14 counts of kidnapping. My bond was $100,000 or $200,000. One working in the office immediately got on the phone, Bill Consular's office. They took me to the jail. The next morning, the locked building was down here. They done flew down. Had a hearing. It was Judge Hobgood. And he, I don't know why, but he reduced my bond to $25,000. He made a big speech about this not being South Africa, and even poor people should have bonds they can afford. And it shocked a lot of people. Nobody was expecting that. So the National Council of Churches flew down a check, $25,000, and posted my bond. I was only in jail 3 days.
And Eddie Hatcher walked out of jail, a quote-unquote free man, on bail once again. And I don't know how long it was. I think it was only a couple of weeks before, lo and behold, Eddie Hatcher jumps bail again. Eddie Hatcher became the only client I've ever had to jump bail twice. I mean, usually you don't even get a chance to do it once. But in every other case I've ever had, after you've done it once, they say, you know what? Not going to give him a second chance. Well, Eddie Hatcher got a second chance, and he skipped, and he was out of here. This time, it wasn't quite as funny.
I knew they were going to bring in another judge and revoke my bond. I knew it. And I left. I fled. I went to Onondaga. I stayed there a week just long enough to make some phone, get everything set up. Shoshone Bannock Nation, Idaho, the attorneys out there had been talking to me about coming there because they were the only one of only 2 Indian tribes that had a federal extradition treaty. Nobody could come on and get me. Nobody, fed, state, nobody. So I snuck my way out there. And I stayed there. I went before the tribal judge. He granted me sanctuary there when he ordered the state of North Carolina that if they wanted me, they had to send papers in requesting an extradition hearing. And only on his decision would I be extradited back to North Carolina. Well, I knew he never would have done it. He never would have sent me back to North Carolina.
And it was clear that nobody was going to come through the snow to get Eddie Hatcher and bring him back to Robeson County, North Carolina. And it kept snowing. And the snow got deeper and deeper. And Eddie once again decided that if New York was exile, you know, the Northwest, Utah or Idaho or wherever the hell he was in winter, this was purgatory. You can't stay here.
But what happened, the FBI snatched up a 18-year-old Indian boy who was on probation in the state court of Idaho for something he had done in Pocatello. They literally intimidated this boy that if he didn't give them the floor plans of the building I was staying in, that they were going to lock him up. So one morning about 8:30, one of the judges called me and said, Eddie, you need to get down here. He said, they know the floor plans is of where you're staying at. He said, they're going to come in and get you, kidnap you. He said, that's what they're going to do.
Now, who called and warned you?
One of the judges, Clyde Hall, was a tribal judge. He called me and told me to get down to his office. He had found out from the boy what had happened. He said, they're going to come in and get you. And that was on a Friday. It was a blizzard. That Friday night, they snuck me off the reservation and took me way down in Utah and put me on a bus, and I went to San Francisco. I stayed underground with a Filipino family, with a Guatemalan family, with an actress. There were a lot of safe houses out there, a lot of networking in safe houses. And there were very supportive people out there, very anti-government people. And they're willing to take chances. I'm talking about important people. Like I said, I stayed with an actress. I stayed with families with wealth. But they knew how the government was, and they were willing to take chances to protect me. And they did. And then on March the 10th is when I entered the Soviet consulate and asked for political asylum.
It so happens that Bill Kunstler had very good relations with some of the Soviet authorities, and I had dealt with them as well. And given time, we could have explained to folks who Eddie Hatcher was and why he should have political asylum. And given time, I think everybody would have been just as happy to see him go. I mean, if they were okay in Robeson County with Eddie being in New York, and they were, you know, basically chipper about him being in northern Idaho, they would have been thrilled to have Eddie Hatcher in Siberia. I mean, how much further away can he go and still be on planet Earth? I mean, have NASA send him into space. It's okay with the locals, really. They were down with this program. The Soviets, of course, if there's one group of people who had less of a sense of humor than federal authorities about terrorism, it was the Soviets about people walking into their turf, and they promptly, notwithstanding the fact that we made a lot of frantic calls, they threw him out.
So when the feds just got me in the car, take him to the jail, they said, well, how did they treat you? I said, they treated me real good. Tuna fish sandwich, nice glass of tea. Nice. I said, it's real nice. I said, I could stay there a long time. So what they done when they got me to the federal building, they brought in an Indian FBI agent. They thought this would be perfect, that I just spill my guts. And which, you know, I just told him right off the bat, I said, look, I said, don't come try to play me. I said, you know, Indian, you're a damn government agent, and I'm not telling you nothing. Well, about that time, the lawyers come busting in and said, this interrogation is over. My client don't want to talk to you, this is over. And after 4 months, they brought me back to North Carolina. During this time, Judge Dexter Brooks, Superior Court judge, signed an order allowing me to have my New York attorneys, Bill Kunstler, Ron Kuby, Stephanie Moore, in association with the public defender, Angus Thompson. He signed the order authorizing it. So a hearing was ordered on the day after Labor Day, September the 5th, I think it was. We all go into the courtroom. So they brought this judge out of Raleigh to come down here and make us appear before him, and he immediately dismisses all my attorneys. He said, you can't have them. So I'm standing there with no lawyer. Same as in federal court, no lawyer.
Judge Ellis wouldn't go along with this sham that's coming out of the attorney's office, but you flat-heartedly agreed to go along with it.
Even after Hatcher fired his public defender, Judge Robert Farmer said the team of Kunstler and Kuby still could not represent the Tuscarora Indian because the two New York attorneys were not qualified to practice law here in North Carolina.
They want to send him to jail without counsel. It's the dirtiest trick in the book. I was disgraced to be in there.
There's no reason why we can't practice in this court except this judge and this district attorney and this crooked county doesn't want us here.
Everybody says, no, they can't do that. They did it for the press and everybody else. They did it blatantly in the open so everybody would see it, so everybody would see how much power they were wielding. They didn't care who seen what they were doing. So as soon as they did that, I filed a motion to represent myself. It was 7 weeks later, that's when I had that hearing before I Beverly Lake and threw the ink pen at him and cussed him out. He didn't get me with contempt, he charged Barry and Kell with contempt.
The judge alternated between allowing me to be heard and denying me. At one point, he did say he would hear me, and I started explaining to him the history that had led up to Judge Farmer throwing us off the case, the law of North Carolina, whereby I was entitled as a licensed attorney to appear, and Kunstler and Kuby were entitled to appear by reason of the order of the previous judge. He cut me off. When he cut me off, Eddie started screaming obscenities at me.
Cite me. Give me the start. All right, Mr. President. You son of a bitch and racist motherfucker, you maggot.
Eddie, what kind of court do we have?
Y'all go and sit back. You got children. Sit back. Every one of you in the media, sit back. You're just going to come around to every one of you what they're doing to you.
The judge then took a recess, ordered Eddie removed from the court, and ordered me to wait outside. Angus Thompson and I talked to Eddie, calmed him down, told him he needed to cooperate, and the judge brought Eddie back in. I was kept outside, allowed him to represent himself, and so the public defender was off the case also. And then he said, what about Mr. Nakel? The judge ordered me brought in, ordered me to appear 2 days later for a contempt hearing. Cited me for criminal contempt and ordered me to come back 2 days later. So, of course, this was not what Eddie wanted, and Eddie, of course, was feeling pretty much abandoned again. His attorneys were not even able to be heard on his behalf, let alone to be able to accomplish anything, win any of his rights. He knew his rights were being denied, and here he was being held as a safekeeper, being totally frustrated.
What's going to be your justice anyhow? It don't matter if I had 6 attorneys, and I'm not going to get justice. People know that. So the outcome's going to be the same no matter if I defend myself or who defends me. I'm sure I can put some heat on them about me defending myself because there's things they've got to do and they're going to have to do.
Eddie was really getting quite depressed about the whole situation and decided that he wanted to bring it to an end. So he decided that he wanted to plead guilty. I advised against it. Kunstler and Kuby advised against it. We tried to talk him out of it. We delayed doing anything about it to give him time to think about it. And finally we got the decision of the North Carolina Supreme Court putting us back on the case. I thought that would, or at least reversing the order, throwing us off, I thought that would embolden Eddie to proceed, but he still wanted to get it over with.
By that time, it was almost 2 years. I was tired. I mean, I was give out. I needed a rest. So the DA went to Barry and told us, look, we'll give Eddie 18 years. They said, how long will Eddie have to serve on this 18 before he gets parole? They said, oh, 2 years, 2 months, he'll be out. So no more than 2 years and 2 months. So I told Barry, I said, well, hell, Barry, I said, if I had 2 years, I said, we might not even be at trial in 2 years. I said, I can already go in and be out. I said, plus this will give me a little time to work in the prison system, see what's going on in here, you know.
And I simply stood up and told the court that this was an autonomous decision by Mr. Hatcher to plead guilty.
Do you now personally plead guilty?
Yes.
Are you in fact guilty?
Meantime, I think Timmy had come in and been sentenced as a committed youthful offender, which meant a 6-year sentence. So he had already pled guilty and got a much lighter sentence. And Eddie was taken back and put in the general population at Central Prison.
2 years and 2 months would become 7 years in 8 correctional facilities.
But my first visit with Eddie was in Central Prison. And in Central Prison, you can't visit a prisoner and touch. You can't hold hands and say prayers. You can't be in the same room and be with a person. You have to go and sit behind glass. And so my first visit with Eddie was to just say hello and talk a little bit through glass. Put my hand up on the glass, said a prayer with him. He put his hand on the glass. We said a prayer, and that was my first meeting.
Well, you know, they first sent me to Central Prison before I'd even been convicted. They sent me to what they call safekeeping, but what it was a lockdown block. I was on that lockdown block from July of '89 until February of '90 when I got my 18-year sentence. It was we had to go through this, even though we hadn't been convicted, we had to go through the same thing convicted prisoners had to go through. We had to go through medical tests, diagnostic stuff, tests. We had to go by the same rules. We didn't get to go outside no more than the death row inmates. We were treated just like the death row inmates. But overall, on that safekeeping, the guards and stuff really didn't mess with us bad. They didn't mess with me bad. And again, I think it had a lot to do with who I was.
Well, the North Carolina Council of Churches took an interest in Eddie, particularly through the Criminal Justice Committee of that council. And through our contacts with Eddie and with his mother, you know, looked more closely at his situation, and finally declared Eddie a political prisoner in the very the deepest sense of being a political prisoner. He was really being held in prison by the politics of the state.
People don't realize it, but what I did was that I let Raleigh, and when I say Raleigh, I mean over there on West Jones Street, the secretary's office, and them know that anything that happened to Eddie or whatever, I was going to be there. And that I certainly would not just sit around and keep my mouth shut. If I had to walk, if I had to lay down on the street up there, wherever or whatever, that I was going to let people know what was happening to my son.
Then actually transferred me to Troy. They harassed and they would shake my cell down twice a week. Just harass me, just on a regular basis. And it took me a lot of months to get them off of me. I mean, I had to file a lot of lawsuits. And by this time, I got pretty good with lawsuits. I mean, I was good. I mean, I even had federal clerks telling Mom would always take them and file them for me. And they'd say, he does lawsuits better than the lawyers that come in here. I got real good. And after about 6 months, they kind of slapped. We come to an understanding. If you'll leave me alone, I'll leave y'all alone.
I mean, there were times we say, Eddie, now, do you realize if you say this or do this, it's going to get you this? And he'd say, I realize that, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to do it. So inside the prison system, this resisting power, which I just really prize so much, I saw in this man. He could not bear seeing something wrong outside, but inside the prison, he couldn't bear to see something wrong inside the prison. So out of that came his newsletter and his constant badgering about what was wrong inside the prisons. I could say those things from outside the prison. Nobody paid much attention. He could say them inside the prison. They paid attention. Like, they paid attention by cracking on him. The system cracked on him.
So when I got stabbed, they really did try to let me die. I know that. The day I got stabbed, first of all, there was never a time that there was not a guard on that yard. Never. We never went on that yard. There wasn't a guard out there walking all over. When the boy was stabbing me, I fought the knife for a good 3 to 4 minutes. No guard was in sight nowhere. The last time he hit me, when he hit me through my lung in the back, I plunged through the door and I blacked out for like 3 or 4 seconds. I don't remember anything from the door to coming to on the hall floor. Now where I come to at, 15 feet this way is the guard booth with 2 guards in it. 6 feet from where I'm laying is the sergeant's office. And 30 feet down this way is another guard booth with 2 guards in it. I laid there on the floor for a good 2 minutes, got up, pulled the knife out of my own bag and dropped it, and started walking toward this booth at the gate to go to medical. And by the time I got there, finally a guard appeared. That never happened. You never went that long you didn't see a guard. I mean, here's 5 guards and none of them saw nothing. After I got to medical, they let me lay there a good hour before they even called the ambulance. I was choking on my own blood. Couldn't breathe. It was in the awfulest pain I'd ever been in. Finally, they got an ambulance and they took me to Durham General. After I got stabbed, after the stabbing, they released me from the hospital about 14 days later. They transferred me to Odom Farm, which was 200 miles from the house, and locked me up because I got stabbed. They put me on lockup. I stayed on lockup for 11 months, single cell, and I was the one that got stabbed.
That didn't get much attention. It was a small news item, the fact that he had been stabbed. And what didn't really get attention was the fact that the man who stabbed him later complained publicly in letters to the editor of a major paper in North Carolina that he didn't get what he was promised for having done that stabbing. Well, I'd like to know more about that. We never were able to get to that. We were never able to get to the facts of that.
I think they was doing this trying to break me. They'd come in and look at me every day, see if I was talking to myself. But I wouldn't, I was just, how you doing? You doing all right today? You know? And they got so frustrated they couldn't stand it. They actually got frustrated because I wouldn't break down.
How'd you keep yourself sane?
Oh, I read 1,000 books. Read, wrote, listened to the radio. We were allowed to have a little radio. And that's how I stayed sane.
I'd say, Eddie, you lay down or sit down and you close your eyes and you start. I said, you can be anywhere you want to be. You don't have to be there in that cell. You can be anywhere you want to be. And at one point, Eddie told me it was kind of like his spirit would just leave his body and he could just, you know.
And after Odom, they transferred me to Hoke. Now at Hoke, I had it made. Hoke Prison in Rayford. They transferred me there in May of '93. I literally ran that place. I'm serious, I ran it. I had guards that would come to me to ask me to go talk to the big man for a raise for them. I ran everything. The unit manager over all my unit, I would have a debriefing with her every morning she come in. Things I thought needed to be done, whatever. And there was nothing that I ever wanted done that weren't done. Inmates would come to me to get bed changes, get special visits. I ran it. After 18 months, you know, they don't like to keep you to prison too long. They transferred me to Albemarle. That was in December of '94. And I hated it. It was a bunch of redneck cops that barreled mouthfuls of tobacco. And as soon as I got out of the car, I said, oh, Lord, I'm going to have to straighten these people out up here, I reckon. And it was a job. I mean, when I went to a new prison, it was a job because I had to let them know where I stood and where they stood. And I wasn't going to take just anything. And so I had to start all back over again. And it was work.
Well, what you learned to start with, that basically that anybody who's going to speak up about any injustice inside the system, the prison system, the criminal justice system, anybody who's going to speak up and call attention to it is going to be in trouble. You don't speak up and out against any of the injustices there.
And so I just told that superintendent, I said, you can do one of two things. You need to transfer me or we're going to have bad problems. I said, I don't care nothing about lockup. I said, I've done a lot of it and it don't bother me not near a bit. I said, in fact, I get my best legal work done on lockup. So, see, they didn't know how to handle me. And everywhere I went, they didn't know how to handle me because I didn't care. There's nothing they could, I felt there's nothing they could do to me that would bother me. But what happened, they sent me to Statesville. As soon as I got to Statesville, the superintendent come walking. The superintendent never goes and greets a new inmate that comes to a prison, but they always did me. He come, he said, I'm the superintendent here, how you doing? I said, all right, how you doing? He said, they had a furniture factory there. He said, you think you ready to come on out and go in the furniture factory and go to work? I said, nope. I said, I'm not working in a furniture factory. I said, I got no desire to know how to build no furniture. I ain't gonna build none when I get out and don't care to know nothing about it. He said, well, I was gonna let you on out. I said, you ain't got, I said, I don't care nothing about you letting me out. I said, I'm not going to a furniture factory. He looked, he says, well, you just a hard case, ain't you? I said, no, I'm just telling you the way it is. There's no need for me to go in that furniture factory. I have no future plans in it, have no desire to learn it, look at it, or nothing else. He said, well, he said, maybe when you change your mind, I might come back and talk to you. We'll let you out. I never changed my mind. He never let me out until my time was up. Well, they transferred me to Monroe. Monroe was a prison that was wide open. There was anything you wanted there, crack, cocaine, pot. I mean, it was really just a wide open. Well, it was a small prison, but it was wide open. Well, the guards really didn't mess with you there. They didn't mess with me. But that's when I got sick. I started getting sick about the second week of January, '95. I had something, it felt like a little congestion. You know, when you're getting a cold, I felt like I had a little congestion down here in my chest. And so the nurse come by, and I told him, I said, I got a little congestion. I said, if you give me something, I believe I can break it up and I'll be all right. He said, well, I'll give you a cold pill. It was one of the things, the cold pill was the one chlorotrimeton for your head and have a damn thing to do with nothing about your chest. I said, all right. So each day it was progressively getting worse. My breath was getting shorter. Anyway, for 5 days he changed my diagnosis every day. And I'm begging him for something for pain. And finally I told him, I said, why are you making me suffer like this? I said, I'm hurting. I said, either kill me or do something. Do one of the two. I said, because I can't take this no longer. He said, Mr. Hatcher, he said, I'm getting on the phone right now to Central Prison. He said, see if I can't get you up there. He said, because I don't know what's wrong with you. This was on a Thursday.
Eddie's mother made frantic calls to the governor's staff to have Eddie re-examined at Central Prison.
I told one of them one day, I said, if something happens to Eddie, I hope God will do me as good as he done Samson and give me the jawbone of an ass.
As soon as I went in, they were very hostile to me, the nurse and the PA. Hostile, real hostile. They rolled me in there, put me on the bed. The PA come in there, and he looked at me. He said, there ain't nothing wrong with you. I said, I'm telling you, there's something bad wrong with me. I mean, you just wouldn't believe how I looked and felt. And every breath, by this time, I was having to moan. It was a moan with every little breath. He said, shut up, moan, there ain't nothing wrong with you. And at that moment, if I'd have had the strength, I would have beat the living hell out of him. I mean, I would have probably killed him. He said, shut up. He listened around a little bit. He says, Mr. Hatcher, he said, you've convinced yourself you're sick. He said, you're in depression. He said, I'm referring you to the psychiatric unit. And I got the medical record right here. I can show you where he wrote that. Referred to psychiatric services. That was on the 24th of February. He said, send him back to Salisbury. And the 2 guards were standing there. And the doctor told him, says, don't put him in that wheelchair. Make him walk. These 2 guards looked at each other. They said, Hatcher, get in this wheelchair. And the doctor just looked at him. I mean, they knew how bad I was. I puked all the way back to Salisbury, and they was just shaking their heads. When I got back to Salisbury, a nurse met us. She said, what is this? She said, I can't believe this. She said, what's going on here? I continued from that Friday. I mean, I just got bad, real bad. I'd never been nothing like this before. No, not even close to it.
As his condition worsened, Eddie's mother once again intervened. Upon orders from the governor's office, he was sent back to Central Prison.
And they did. They transported me back to CP about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was diagnosed with double pneumocystis pneumonia with 4 T cells and a temp of 106. And here, just 29 hours earlier, that doctor said there's nothing wrong with me, but I need psychiatric service.
I think the humanitarian part of it, the part of it that he would die on them and the AIDS was playing a factor, it was a factor in the state's decision to let him go. And a number of us saying, you know, this is not a good thing for you to be doing. The state needs to let Eddie Hatcher go.
I laid there from March 1st, and the days got longer, and Mom and him kept telling me, Jim Lewis kept telling me, you're going to get out, Eddie, they're working on it, they're going to get you out. And after about 6 weeks, I finally told him, I said, I don't want to hear it. I said, don't tell me nothing. But finally on May the 3rd, I was laying on the bed looking at Barnaby Jones, about 10:30. And one nurse came in and said, Hatcher, get your stuff together, you got to go downstairs. And I knew right then I was getting out. And I waited down there about 30 minutes, and the parole officer showed up and signed some papers and took me out, put me in the car, and brought me home.
So I guess you wonder, where is God in all this, huh?
Oh, he's in it. It's a job from taking care of it, you can believe that.
No, I mean, as far as the people and the church and the community.
I don't believe God's in a whole lot of them churches down there, and I've written legislators saying that. I don't believe God's in a lot of them. I don't believe he's welcome in a lot of them by the way they live their lives. God says he despises hypocrites. In fact, he says he's going to spew them out of his mouth at judgment. So I don't believe he's in a lot of them churches down there.
There's a deep spirituality to this man, a deep faith, and a deep and abiding belief in justice and mercy.
They're concerned with building big mausoleums with cushioned pews, stained glass windows, big choir rooms. That's all they're concerned with. God didn't have a big church. Jesus didn't. I mean, I just get real frustrated with churches. I mean, but it don't change my feelings toward God, my spirituality. But I have no use for churches.
You know, from the very first day, Eddie Hatcher reminded me of an old-fashioned prophet, the prophet Amos. In fact, we used to talk about that. You know, standing on the steps of the temple, in those days, the temple being the place of power, political and religious, and screaming out to the people of his own people, beware, don't you see what's happening? Don't you see what's going on? Don't you see the corruption? Don't you see the way what you say you believe and what you are doing isn't congruent? He reminded me of this kind of old-time, fiery, no nonsense, no compromise, don't give an inch prophet.
I think Eddie Hatcher is a prophet in modern day times. I think he's had first of all, the ability to retain a moral outrage at injustice when so much of the rest of us get lulled and sort of slip into tolerance that, oh, that's just the way it is. Maybe that's the way it's meant to be. And Eddie never seemed to be in any way content or able to rationalize away that pain and misery that people are experiencing that he was around and that he knew about. And he was always keen to that.
No, I don't think Eddie Hatcher's a revolutionary. I mean, Eddie Hatcher is an instigator. Eddie Hatcher is an agitator. Eddie Hatcher is the guy who's going to be there pointing out, this is wrong, you can't do this, don't do this. Eddie Hatcher will be the one standing there in the middle of the street as the tanks rumble down, you know, waving a flag that says this or that. But he's not a revolutionary in the sense that he's an organizer. He's not a revolutionary even in the sense that he has some sort of organized system of thought that he can apply in some sort of systematic way. I mean, he's not Lenin, he's not Trotsky, he's not Mao, he's not Fidel. You know, he's sort of a unique, in-your-face kind of figure. And I think we can draw a lot of inspiration from what Eddie's done. And I think we can admire him for his courage, his boldness, his recklessness, his willingness to sacrifice himself, his willingness to do stuff that seems totally crazy because it has to be done and nobody else will do it.
Yeah, I would say he's revolutionary. I think like a lot of, you know, he certainly has a revolutionary spirit and a willingness to act some of that out. I think he lacks sometimes the kind of discipline and grounding that would make him more effective. But then again, you know, you can't be all things. You know, somebody who leads a revolution can't always lead a parliament. So I'm not making any judgment on Eddie about that. I think that revolutionary spirit is very much there. You know, if government is corrupt, and if government doesn't pay attention, then sometimes there's a time to even take up arms against that government. Thomas Jefferson said that. I didn't. Eddie Hatcher didn't. And I think he kind of, I don't want to liken Eddie to Thomas Jefferson, but in a sense, I think Eddie has a spirit that's running through him that's very American, very North American. That if things get so bad, you better yell. You better yell.
Eddie gave enough to the people in Robeson County that you can help people, but they have to help themselves, and it's time for them to do that. That Eddie gave enough. He's practically gave his life down there. And it wasn't that it wasn't needed. I've never been in a place like Robeson County. It's like being in a different world.
I believe change has come about as a result of all of this, I believe that at some point in time, people will give Eddie a little recognition for bringing this about.
I think that there was a lot of paranoia on his part when he went in that day. You know, he says he went in, Eddie Hatcher says he went in that day to protect his own life. I can't tell that there was anything more than a lot of paranoia.
He brought a lot of scrutiny to the bear on this county, public scrutiny by the media, and caused, in some respects, some things that were practices to discontinue. For example, murders, unexplained murders. They really began to drop and stop right there all of a sudden. The other aspects, the political aspects of it, the corruption part of it, I think went more underground, deep underground. I think Eddie tapped the surface of what was a very, very large drug cartel in this county, with roots in other places, from here to Raleigh to Washington and to Miami. I think he was involved with a monster of enormous size, and he's lucky to be alive today as a result of that, because I don't think that monster could be defeated by one human being. I don't think so. It would consume that person and almost has him.
I remembered the day, it was not long after the takeover. I was sitting, Hardee's is a place where many of us used to go in the mornings, have coffee and socialize, talk about what was happening. And I remember sitting with John Godwin. I'd always have coffee and some breakfast with John. Some people came in and said, "Hey, John," says, "the merger went through." That's what school merger. And he turned around and looked up at them and said, "Yes, but if it hadn't been for Eddie Hatcher and Timmy Jacobs doing what they did, it never would have happened." And a lot of things have happened since then that happened because of that takeover, because they knew people were there and were not sleeping anymore, just letting it be handed to us. And that's the way it had been all these many years.
Undoubtedly, the takeover contributed to the circumstances that were going on in Robeson County at the time. Julian Pierce was running against Joe Freeman Britt for judge. The Indians in Robeson County became empowered by Eddie's action. They thought, if Eddie can do this, we can at least get out and work for Julian Pierce. And that got Julian Pierce's campaign a big boost. Indeed, such a successful boost that even after he was murdered, I think he got enough votes in the election to win, although because he was dead, the winner was declared to be Joe Freeman Britt. I don't think anybody was motivated at all to follow that model, but people did get involved in his defense as a way of showing support for not the way he undertook to do it necessarily, although people understood why he did what he did, but for the causes he was supporting, bringing justice to Robeson County. And in the ensuing years, there have been substantial improvements.
It just woke people up, you know. Hey, God, no, we're human beings, you know. We can do anything anybody else can do if just given a chance. You know, and back in the, when we began our movement, the people said, "Boy, you can't do that. Hey, you can't do that." But we can do that. Just got to step up and say, "I can and I will," you know, by God's help.
He's not afraid of nothing anymore, nothing. He says he don't mind dying.
What would you like for us to agree together and go to God about?
Let me see. I got a strong family. I don't know if you know anything about my case, but I got a real strong family. But I'd like to pray that we get even stronger.
God, as I come with my brother.
A resistant spirit that grows tired either finds new energy up to the very last day to keep resisting and keep speaking out,
And that God,
or that spirit becomes cynical,
God, help him
depressed, despairing, and dies a very lonely, harsh death. And I pray against that for him. My prayer for Eddie always is that he'll use that resisting power up to the last day to engage himself in telling the truth and causing all the rest of us to look at some truth. So, God forbid that he, he'd be so tired that his last cry wouldn't be one about injustice, but rather just so exhausted he can't even see what the truth is. I mean, it would be very sad to me. You know, through all this thing, we kind of expect our truth bearers, or the people that point to what's going on, we kind of expect them to be real clean, real sweet looking, real soft, real packaged. I mean, there's, particularly today, there's this kind of emphasis on everything being packaged in the right way. And I think we've lost and any understanding that, you know, a prophetic voice sometimes is off the wall. It's half crazy. It's wild. It can't be easily contained in a small blip on television. And it's that kind of spirit, it's that kind of wildness that's at the heart of the prophetic voice. So, you know, Eddie seems to be embodied that. That's hard for us to face up to that. Where Eddie has difficulty is that can fall off the edge real fast. And by that, it can't be contained on a canvas. It can't be held in any kind of perspective that helps people move forward. But again, prophetic voice has to do what prophetic voice does. Leave it to the rest of us to get it on a canvas. And that wildness is there's a special grace in it, a special curse in it, but there's a real grace in it.
What do you want your legacy to be?
That I tried to expose the major cocaine trafficking going on in Robeson County, the degree that it was, where it was coming from, and the unsolved murders, and that I fought as long as I could fight. And I never let them beat me. They ain't never beat me, not one time. They didn't beat me in the federal case. When I was on the run in the federal case, I came back when I got ready to come back. The trial, I got acquitted. Went right back to fighting them. Re-indicted, run, never could catch me. I surrendered when I got ready to surrender on the terms that I wanted, going to the consul. That was my terms. I chose those terms. They didn't. I was facing 420 years, didn't get but 18, and I'm out. I have beaten them at every turn, and nobody can ever take that away from me. I've beat this whole United States government at every turn.
But do you think that they whooped you, they locked you up in jail?
No, they know I beat them. They know it. They know it, and that's what's killing them. That's why so many of them despise me, because I beat them. They're this all-powerful government, supposed to win every time, and they didn't win with Eddie. They just didn't win.
That's pretty nice.